Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and this is always I hate saying favorite because I don't want somebody to think that I like one podcast more or the other, but it's always my pleasure every single term to invite the speaker at our CPC Film Series to the show. And I'm going to do that today by welcoming Nightly News President Jenelle Dulack. Jenelle will be presenting Hairspray on Friday, May 16th at 6:30 in the Capitol Blue Cross Theater. Jen, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And of course, we are also being joined by the Nightly News Film Series correspondent, Dylan Bowman. Dylan, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Professor Miller. Glad to be back.
Well, and we're certainly glad to have you. So today we are going to be focusing specifically on the upcoming CPC Film Series in Hairspray. So there's just a litany of questions. However, I want to start at the beginning. And the beginning here means the beginning of the program that we're going to be having at the film series. Something that's going to be much different than any film series that we've had before is at 6:30, we, Professor Olympia and I, will be presenting the Pennsylvania News Media Awards to the students who won. We have had, I want to say we had 7 winners, winning honorable mention in 3 categories, one of those folks being you, Jen. So Jen won one of these honorable mentions. We won as collectively from the diversity category, in which Professor Olympia spearheaded the Layers of Community series of which you participated. So I guess my first question is, what was your reaction when you first heard that you'd been awarded a statewide award in journalism?
I was pleased. I mean, I didn't even expect to receive anything back because of how large the other schools are in comparison to ours. But I know that, and I have faith that everything that's made in the Nightly News is of top-notch quality, especially after it's been reviewed and talked about, and we figure out what the best way to word things are. It's the practice that we get in doing what we do only makes us better, and that's been proved by the awards that we've got.
When I received the email from our contact at the Pennsylvania News Media Association, was one of the most proud days of my entire life. Not solely because my name was listed on there as one of the award winners, but because of the pride that I had for not only you, not only Leslie, but also people like Jamie and Alexa, who are also such an important piece of what we're doing. And of course, Professor Olympia too. I mean, frankly, because he's the editor of the blog, this is, in effect, one of his awards. Like, I'm going to recognize him as well. It was something that I'll never forget as long as I live. I remember this similar joy when Leslie won back in 2020, but this was just like on a whole different ball game. You know, we had
It's a level up.
3 honorable mentions. We had one of our series, which was comprised of so many folks who, frankly, you and Jamie are graduating. Alexa will be graduating at the end of the year. This might be one of the last times that you have an opportunity like this to win an award.
And we put so much effort into doing that too. Like the amount of meetings that we were discussing, just like who's going to talk to who and how.
The behind the scenes. We'll just give you a quick peek behind the scenes here. This Layers of Community series was probably one of the most difficult things that we've done as a club because it took a lot of coordination. We wanted it to be released at a certain period of time. It was an interview series, so we had to touch base with the folks that are being interviewed. We had to decide who was going to be interviewed.
Meaningful people.
Anyway, the long story short is this series, I think, is something that I'm most proud of, even though I can honestly say I didn't have much to do with. But just the fact that we got recognized for these things, it's something I'll never forget. It's something I will never forget, and I'm so happy for you, and I'm so happy for everyone else that won an award, and I hope whatever words I managed to come up with for that when we present you these awards are truly from my heart. I hope that this means something to you, and I hope that this is something that you remember. I know that Jen's already kind of on to one foot out the door here, and I totally get that as a graduating senior with a job lined up, essentially. I hope that this is something, though, that you still value and realize the scope of this. I mean, this is, to your point, we are competing with schools with under 10,000. We basically have an enrollment of about 1,000, give or take, right? we are competing with schools like Shippensburg, Slippery Rock University, Messiah,
Yeah, 10
St.
times
Francis.
the size.
Huge
impressive.
schools with huge budgets, and many of them with journalism programs, which we do corporate communications. There's some similarities there. We do not have a journalism program. We have a media club that definitely does not receive the same financial support as larger schools. So what we are able to do with the resources that we have and the students that we have is amazing. And it's something that we as a club, this is really what says that we have value here.
Absolutely.
So I'm so glad that you are appreciative of that. But let's get into what we really want to talk about here today, and that is the film series. So, Hairspray. Tell us a little bit more. So first of all, there's a very long lineage of Hairspray. So first of all, talk to us about sort of the history of Hairspray, and then maybe why you landed on this as a film that you wanted to present in your opportunity to do this.
Okay, so I actually really want to start with why I chose this film. So within the film series, I've never, ever done a musical, which is a very particular genre, an underestimated genre, but also the people who love it are extremely dedicated. So what I really wanted to do was kind of prove the value that the medium of musicals have, the way that you can express your emotions and stories in song form. It's beautiful. So that was really a big piece of it, but also the original Hairspray, which was released in 1988, was directed and created by John Waters. And anybody who knows me knows that I'm obsessed with John Waters. I recently read his book called Carsick, which has been, it's basically his journey of going from Baltimore to California, but by hitchhiking through strangers' cars. The first section of the novel is just fiction of what the best could happen is, could be. The middle section is all of the worst that could ever happen, and his last section, which he wrote after writing the first two, is what actually did happen when he hitchhiked. And I was so inspired just by the way that he wrote, but then I realized that Hairspray, which the more recent one, was already my favorite movie. I hadn't even realized that he had created the original one. So I just fell in love with the idea of trying to decipher where all of these pieces connect within all of the different movies. Although it's the same movie, there's so many differences, so many nuances, but also things that stayed the same that I really want to discuss and why they stayed the same.
I have actually not had any experience with Hairspray. Like you said that there's a lineage of Hairspray movies. Is there more? Is there like just two or like more than two?
So the way it is that there was originally the movie created by John Waters. And then after that, a theater director realized the potential of that movie and created a play. So the original movie actually had no music in it. There's not a single song.
Oh, wow.
It's just a story, of just a young girl who really wants to get on her local TV show and realizes that segregation and fat phobia are two barriers inside of that company. But the person who created the music, actually, it was created for the stage. So then after that, somebody was like, wow, this is an incredible movie. Incredible show. I want to turn it back into a movie with more current actors. So that's why we have Zac Efron, who is it, Christopher Walker.
Hold on a second. John Travolta? Is that
John Travolta.
You're saying Christopher Walken's in this movie?
I'm pretty sure, yes. He's the father with John Travolta.
Okay.
John Travolta plays Edna, who is in drag in the whole movie. Who else is in it? Nikki Blonsky, which was one of her greatest appearances so far. Who else is in that movie? I mean, Amanda Bynes, she's in it. It's filled with stars, and every single person plays the role as that character. Like, usually when I watch a movie that Zac Efron appears in, I only see him as Zac Efron. He is not his character. This movie, he is Link. You don't see him as Zac Efron. And so does every other character. They blend right into the 1960s. It's beautiful.
Is this the first time that this has been made into a musical film? Because the initial film, you're saying, had little to no music. This is the first occasion of Hairspray in film that is this musical that's also presented as a theatrical performance.
Correct. And that was in 2007. And the people who created the movie form of Hairspray actually created multiple other musical movies in the past, like Rent in Chicago. So they had a lot of experience, and that's why the production quality of it did not flop. However, when it came out, box office, received it well, but it wasn't like the teen hit both times, both the original and the second release. However, by then, after however many years, I think it was about 5 or so years that between the musical release and the second movie release, the musical attendance had kind of died down, and at that time the economy was starting to kind of dip as well. So when the movie released, that made the musical also boom. So the only change that they even did to marketing for that musical, they changed nothing except for see it live. So I mean, just the multitude and the many ways that this has been created and enjoyed by many different people. I mean, people who originally, because when you think of different genres of movie, you have like drama, romance, comedy, horror, whatever. But there's a genre called the John Waters movies. Like it's grotesque. He's named the Pope of Trash. It's grotesque, disgusting, weird, awful on purpose because he's trying to make commentary on political correctness and social norms. And so that's what all of it is about acceptance. Not once in any of the iterations of Hairspray has that essence been removed, the John Waters essence of acceptance and discussion of social norms.
That's really, and it's always interesting to see how, at least to me, how musicals start off usually on Broadway or like live theater performances, and then they transform into a classical movie that people know decades down the line. Some of my favorites are 1776, which is, I think, very underrated. Not many people know about it. Singing in the Rain is a classic. The Greatest Showman is one of my new favorites. But it's just really interesting to see how that transfer happens. It's like a big story.
Right, and that's why I really want to talk about why it's so important to be discussing musicals and things like that, because imagine somebody who lives in New York and frequently goes to Broadway. They've enjoyed Hairspray only from the stage, and they never really saw the movie because the only people who watch John Waters movies are John Waters fans. So, if somebody who's a John Waters fan might live in Kentucky, Kansas, Montana, Nebraska, they can't go to a Broadway show and see it like that. But they're still getting the same essential story and experience and able to receive the same message, which is incredible. I mean, think about, for an example, I read the book Anxious People. It's actually like one of the best-selling books right now, and incredible book. You can tell that the person who wrote it figured out the storyline before they wrote the book and then pieced together the order that they wanted to tell it so that the characters retained their meaning. When you watch the Netflix version of that, all of it's lost because you can tell that the people who made it probably read like the front and back cover. I'm like, oh, I get it, and then threw together a Netflix show. You lose the characters, you lose the meaning, and you lose like what it's all really about, which is like, the original themes that come from the 1988 version.
What's interesting to me is, okay, so both Dylan and Jen are in a selected topics and media studies class, and one of the things that I've been doing in my PhD studies is looking at film, and I believe my dissertation is going to be in film, and frankly, I believe that my future studies will be in film. And Jen, I read your work, and the first essay that I'd ask you to do is to talk about what film meant to you. And we've had this discussion before, but you're not necessarily a movie buff. So which is really interesting because pretty much everyone who's ever presented at the film series would consider themselves a movie buff. But here, and this is a huge but here, and I made this comment today, and I don't know if you saw it. You were differentiating between television and film, and the point that I made is the line between television and film has blurred so much, especially with binge watching of programs. Essentially,
Absolutely.
Something like one of my favorites, like Better Call Saul, is essentially a 10-hour-long movie broken up into 10 episodes. And so I wonder why you kind of downplay your own knowledge of even just, let's call it video, right? We'll put television and film in one box for now. You're so interested in some of these films. You're so knowledgeable about some of these films, but yet you downplay your own knowledge on film. Can you just try to explain why that is?
The reason I kind of downplay it is because most film buffs are so entertained by what is currently like top of the box office. Like we were just discussing some of the directors that we are learning about in our class, and Dylan has Christopher Nolan. But Christopher Nolan has every single movie that he's made rockets to the top of the list. It just has his name on it. It's his brand. And so like my love for film comes from the niche, the weird, the odd, the things you shouldn't like. When I wrote about the things that I appreciate in film, one of the things I mentioned is the movies that are so bad that they're good. For example, I have watched the Emoji Movie more than once, and I can say that with pride because I've analyzed the meaning behind how awful the movie is and how far advertising had gone into the movie to the point where it's basically just one big 1.5 hour long ad. I wouldn't say that I'm a movie buff. I would say that I appreciate storytelling, and that comes in any form. I love poetry, I love music, I love musicals, I love anything. But as long as a good story is told, that's where I'm engaged.
Interestingly, Jen, you made a comment, something about with the Emoji Movie. I like almost like you felt bad about analyzing it. I went to the National Popular Culture Association conference last week, and not that anyone did something about the Emoji Movie specifically, but you should have seen some of the topics on some of these unbelievably obscure things that people are studying. And obviously, I did my piece about Tenet, which was pop culture focused. Let's just put it this way. There is room for scholarship in the exact area that you're talking about. And that's one of the reasons that I like studying film, because it's not just, hey, let's study the biggest and baddest movies or the biggest and best movies. It's let's find something that is a part of popular culture, but isn't necessarily defining popular culture. Like when I think defining popular culture, what I'm thinking of is your Avengers films, Marvel things like that, Star Wars movies that a ton of people see. That's not necessarily what doing research in this area is. I guess all of this is a long way to say, I wish you wouldn't say that you don't like film simply because you're kind of focused on other visual medium. I hope that maybe at least, yes, I know that we're focusing on film in our selected topics course, but I hope that the analysis is also applicable to television, is also applicable to short documentary films like you make and I know watch. So I think, if anything, you've got a lot more experience in this than you might think.
I really appreciate that. I really am going to take that into consideration. My favorite thing to do is just kind of figure out human behavior through these visual mediums, especially because I know, and so does Dylan, if you want to chime in on this, what it's like to create something like that. Having to make every single decision. We've talked about this. Every minute and every second of what you put on the screen is put there for a reason.
Right.
Even if you have to trim down like the half second of somebody walking across the street, it's important because you need a half second to tell some other part of the story. So it's when you watch somebody else's film or video or show I personally am always thinking about like, oh, that was a really smart choice. Oh, I wouldn't have thought about that. Or, oh, I wouldn't have done that. And thinking about like why they made those choices and maybe like, oh, well, maybe I should put that in what I do next or consider it next time,
Exactly. Yeah, the storytelling part for me is, I would agree with you. Storytelling for me is probably, other than cinematography maybe, and how they frame the photo, lighting, etc. Storytelling is huge for me. If I go and see even like people would say, oh, that's the best Marvel movie ever. If the story is like really flat and bland, it will be my least favorite Marvel movie.
Right.
So,
well, Jen, I want to just, again, remind everybody, Friday, May 16th, 6:30 p.m. is when we are going to do the presentation of awards. And then just after that, you'll be giving your presentation. We'll watch the film. Of course, it's free. Please come down. Please support Jen. I just have a couple of more questions that I want to ask you. First of all, this is an opportunity that we don't take lightly as a committee that puts this on in terms of students. And obviously, Leslie has come before you and has presented. But when we first started talking about this, and I floated the idea to you about potentially doing this in your last term here on campus, what did that mean? And now that it's just a few weeks away, where are you at with how you feel about this? I mean, frankly, I don't want to diminish anything else that you might have coming forward. This is maybe your last hurrah here as a student. So talk to me about how that impacted your thinking.
I think what really meant the most is that if you just look at me and Leslie from a bird eye view, we're like shining with enthusiasm to do things, anything. And the things that matter the most to us are film and video and discussing the analysis and the deep thoughts that go into creating things. Me and Leslie are very similar in that way. And being chosen to do and being asked to do something like this tells me that the rest of the committee sees that and sees the enthusiasm that shines upon us. So I'm forever grateful that I've been given this opportunity to talk about one of my favorite movies of all time, because I know that when I have that smile on my face and I'm excited and I'm passionate and I'm talking about something and my hands are moving all willy-nilly, that everybody else in the audience is just as engaged as I am, because they're excited and ready to learn and ready to be receptive, which I always appreciate.
Again, just a little bit of background here, Jen. So Jen, when you came here, you were a PTA student. And the day that I will never forget, the first day I ever met you, because you wanted to talk more about our program. And now you look, just a couple of short years later, how far you have come. I mean, you've made 4 documentary films. You had our first ever film festival, put all of that together. You're going to be only the second student presenter here on film. I mean, both of you have aspirations of getting into video production of some kind as careers. I mean, to see the progress since I first met you is just frankly unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that to be rude.
No, I know. To me, it's unbelievable too. I remember a very specific memory that brings me both sadness and joy of me. I would pick up Nia Millwood from Dairy Queen every single night when she would work. And I remember when I was a PTA student, I would bring this big stack of note cards that was like every single muscle innervation, every every detail you need to know. And I would sit in my car and just like sob, flipping through these like little note cards. And listen, I know you PTA people, like, you work very hard and it's very worthy to get that degree. But for me, it was just so difficult and it didn't feel fulfilling. And the moment that I realized that I wanted to do something that would give me the opportunity to be creative and be who I am, rather than having to like shove all this information in my head that wasn't me, it felt so much more comfortable, and it relaxed me and my mind, and I was able to do all the things that I've been able to do.
And you're a master at it. I mean, when I've seen some of the work that you've done, I take no credit. I hope, of course, I've had some impact on you.
Of course.
But so much, it's almost like you're the teacher now. Like, I taught you some things, but you've now taken that next step and like mastered it. And like, as an aside, I'm so happy. We've been talking about like collaborating on a project ever since the film festival, and we just couldn't figure out a time. Well, now all 3 of us are collaborating on a piece, and I'm so excited to have that opportunity to do that with both of you, especially because, and this is odd, I don't want to say odd for me to say to a student, but I both look up to you as editors, and yes, I do teach basic production, but you guys are taking it well beyond the basic level. You took what I showed you and ran with it, and evolved and developed your skills, and frankly, it's something that I will always remember with both of you, how amazing it is to see people who are truly, truly masters of their craft. You did it all yourself. I take no credit. If anything, I just gave you the opportunity. And I just think it's so wonderful that you've not only embraced that opportunity, but you've got a job for yourself and you're still in college. I mean, that's fairly unheard of. And it's a job that you're passionate about, so much so that you've changed your life plans for it.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that you just gave a little speech about that, but you don't even know how much I appreciate you and Olympia and all the things that you guys have been able to do for me and anybody else. I mean, it could make me cry. It probably will. But
well, let's hold those tears for May 16th.
I will. But yeah, I mean, sincerely, it has never been my goal to do communications ever. I mean, when I was younger, when I was little, I wanted to be a singer. That was the only thing I could imagine myself doing.
Which you were an amazing singer too, by the way.
Thank you. But that's what I wanted my career to be. And then as I grew older, I kind of had tunnel vision on being a PTA, and meeting you and Olympia have really opened my eyes to the opportunities that I have in front of me. So thank you. Honestly, thank you.
I'm just doing my job, Jen. Dylan, any final thoughts?
Just have one more question for you, kind of jumping back to the presentation coming up. What themes would you want the audience to focus on or to take away from your presentation and the film that you're going to show?
So like I had said before, the main thing is really the discussion of political correctness, which is something that John Waters goes back and forth with in all of his films. He's had ones about his films Female Trouble or Pink Flamingos, if you've heard of it. For example, Pink Flamingos has Divine in it, which is a drag queen that appears in every single one of his films up until Divine's passing 2 weeks after the original Hairspray released. Divine, as her character in Pink Flamingo, eats dog feces off of the ground, and all of the things that happen in every movie, for that one, for example, is made to make you question why in the world would somebody ever do that, and then actually come up with a reason. Like, actually be like, okay, wait, no, that makes sense. That's why she ate the feces off the ground. Or maybe there isn't a reason, and the reason is that she's actually mentally, clinically insane, and you have to just accept that. Like, genuinely accept that people are weird. Everyone has their niche things and weird things about them. For all I know, like, for all you know, I could go home and put on a clown suit and that's my enjoyment. You don't know that. You just have to accept what comes and the people that they are. It's an incredible message that only comes through in John Waters films.
Well, before we get out of here, Jen, I would be remiss to not congratulate you on a very special award that you won at a recent commencement that we had at the Scottish Rite Theatre earlier in April. You took home the Activities and Athletics Award, and trust me, there is no more deserving person than you. Somehow you managed to be an officer on... Can you count how many clubs that at one point or another you were an officer of? I'm going to just say 6 or 7.
It was 7, I think.
I appreciate the way that you have put yourself out there and that the impact that you've had on so many people, so many opportunities you've given people. I'm talking about through the Nightway. I'm talking about through the film festival. I'm talking about with Equal Nights. I'm talking about with Art Club. I'm talking about, I think back, and every time I think of you, and I don't know why I think of this, and I hope that you don't think I'm weird for saying this. Every time I think of you, I think of all the trouble that you put in on the art gallery that you were going to do that literally got closed down because of COVID, and how devastated you were about that. And obviously it never really got to the point where you were able to follow up with that. But when I think of you, that's the first time that I remember having a serious heart-to-heart conversation with you was about that, and how much you were looking forward to it, and how freaked out you were when all this happened. You're like, we don't know if this is actually going to happen or not. I don't know why that's one of the memories that I have, but it was the first time that I actually saw you really becoming emotional because you wanted this not just for you, but for all of the other people who you were promoting. But you also see that not every student is emotionally invested in their education as you, and that's why that was something that really spoke to me, oh my gosh, this means a lot to her.
Yes. And
unfortunately, it didn't happen, but just the time and effort that you put into that did not go unnoticed, I guess is really what I wanted to say. All that being said, congratulations. What did it feel like when you're at commencement to hear your name?
So Nia was sitting next to me, and I did not expect it at all, and it actually made me cry a little bit. I wrote on...
You ran to the stage, too.
I was like, it was just so unexpected. I mean, when they were announcing all the different awards, my family was on the right side to me, and I could hear them getting excited because it would be the leadership award, and be like, oh, is that Jenelle? Is that Jenelle? Is that Jenelle? And then in my head, I'm like, there's no way in God's name that I'm getting any of these things, because it was Leslie, Michelle. It's how can I possibly land next to...
You're in the conversation.
That I would not have possibly expected that ever.
Why?
I mean, come on,
Michelle.
Come on.
Come on. I'm going to give it right back to you. Why would you not be in that crew of people?
Stop being so humble.
I don't know. It really meant a lot. It really did.
It meant a lot, your efforts, the legacy, and I don't say that lightly, that you've left here at Central Penn College. And we're going to cement that legacy on Friday, May 16th, as you present Hairspray as part of the CPC Film Series. So we're so looking forward to that, Jen. And of course, I'm looking forward to presenting you with your Pennsylvania News Media Award honorable mention. So we're looking forward to that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dylan, thank you so much for being a part of the Nightly News podcast today, but also your efforts with the club. So not only have you really filled some massive shoes from Leslie as you took over being the film series correspondent, you've been so actively involved in a wide variety of our other projects, and I just want to say thank you. You have really, and really, this is your 4th term here, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
In 4 terms, you've already elevated yourself to the point where we're already having conversations about you stepping into Jen's position after this term. So I hope that that's something that we can continue having that conversation about. But you've just made an incredible impact in your short time here.
Well,
So I
thank
want
you
to
very much. It's been an honor.
All right, well, Friday, May 16th, we're going to see everybody at the Hairspray edition of the CPC Film Series at 6:30 p.m. in the Capitol Blue Cross Theater. Jen, such a pleasure. If this is the last time I have you on the podcast for a little while, I just want to say how much it's meant to me to have you in my classes and have you be such a mentor to other people. I think that's in your legacy. That's how I'm going to look back at you. Obviously, a hardworking student, unbelievably and unparalleled enthusiasm, but the opportunities that you created for so many other people is never going to be forgotten here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You are very welcome. And Dylan, again, thank you for all of your efforts and continued success here at Central.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. For the Nightly News president, Jenelle Dulack, and for the CPC film correspondent, Dylan Bowman, this is Professor Paul Miller, and we'll see you again next time on the Nightly News Podcast.
Hey, this is Sai Pinthong. Thank you for listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and I am very honored to be joined by the Dean of Equity and Student Success, Megan Peterson. Megan, always one of my favorite guests. It's such a pleasure to have you back on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me back. I always love coming on the podcast.
Well, and we certainly appreciate what you do here at Central Penn, but specifically what we have coming up here this week. So this week at Central Penn College, we will be engaging in Sexual Assault Awareness Week. This is something that we've been doing here at the campus for the last several years, and it's a way for programming to be developed around this unbelievably important week. One of the things that I think is fair to say is that obviously sexual assault happens everywhere, all over. No one is not potentially in the line of this happening to them. But of course, it does happen on college campuses as well. And so one of the things that we're trying to accomplish this week with Sexual Assault Awareness Week is to put that awareness out there about what constitutes sexual assault, what resources there are available, not only here on campus, but in the community, and really just a way to have an open dialogue about, frankly, a very serious subject. So we will be celebrating Sexual Assault Awareness Week with a ton of programming, much of which we'll talk about. But walk us back to the beginning. Obviously, Sexual Assault Awareness Week here on Central Penn's campus has been happening over the past couple of years, but tell us where this kind of originated in terms of from your office perspective.
Sure. So Sexual Assault Awareness Month happens across the world every April. And on Central Penn's campus specifically, we started observing Sexual Assault Awareness Day back in 2017. And from that first day in 2017, it's really grown into the week of programming that it is now. So in 2017, my primary responsibility was solely Title IX. And so we started developing some programming around sexual assault awareness, trying to tie it into that month. And students responded really well. They wanted to see more of that type of programming. And so it has really grown over the years. And the past 3 or 4 years now, it's been this full week of programming.
How difficult is it for you, in addition to all of your other things that you do, to be able to get programming that surrounds this that's going to be meaningful for our students?
It's definitely a lot of work, but it's very worth it. It's something that I look forward to doing every year. It's really great having the students buy in and the students' input into the events that we do. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's definitely worth it. And I just know that the last week of April is going to be really hectic every year.
Well, obviously, we are releasing this podcast on Tuesday, but there was a couple of marquee events that I just want to draw everybody's attention to, if you're listening to this right when it comes out. So let's talk about some of of course, we have a couple featured ones we're going to look at, but just in general, let's talk about some of the events that are coming up as part of Sexual Assault Awareness Week.
Sure. So I'd love to start by talking about some of the things that are going to be happening throughout the week. So I know that students have really busy schedules and they might not be able to pop into a specific event, but we have a number of displays that are up around campus for the entire week that students can drop in and observe whenever they're free. So every year we do a display across the bridge that talks about the prevalence of sexual assault and kind of gives a really visual representation of just how prevalent sexual assault and the impact of it can be. We also have the Clothesline Project display, where students have created shirts that kind of represent experiences that they have, and we have those displayed throughout the quad on campus. And another display that we have is the What I Was Wearing display, which is a really powerful, kind of difficult to walk through display down in the theater that really works to kind of remove some of the stigmas around sexual assault that encourage victim blaming, that a victim must have been asking for it by the way that they were acting or the way that they were dressed. And it really works to break down those stigmas by saying that, no, this is something that can impact anybody. So those are some of the displays that folks can take some time to observe throughout the week.
And there's a couple of marquee specific events. The first one we're looking at is Wednesday, April 27th at 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. in the ATEC Lounge. That will be the French Fry Bar, one of the very successful events of last year. Maybe someone out there listening might wonder, how does a French Fry Bar tie into Sexual Assault Awareness Week? That's a question I'd like you to answer.
I would love to answer that question because it does seem kind of odd, right, to do a French Fry Bar for Sexual Assault Awareness Week. But FRIES, the acronym FRIES, is a really great way to make sure that we're thinking about all the different elements of consent. So consent needs to be freely given. It has to be reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So we use the acronym FRIES to talk about those different elements of consent that need to be present and talk about it in a fun way with some French fries.
Well, and I think that's really cool, too, because when we did it last year, there was some displays, there were some conversations that were being had. It's an interesting way for you in the ATEC Lounge to try to get everybody together, maybe people from all walks of campus. So it's not even just necessarily student-facing. Of course, that's a major part of it, but you also invite faculty and staff, guests to the campus. So we're trying to get people in one area to really focus on the importance and necessity of this conversation, which is what I found really interesting last year.
Absolutely. We want to welcome the whole campus to this event. A lot of times we'll get folks that just kind of walk in, they smell the French fries, not really sure what they're walking into, but who can say no to free French fries? And it's a really great way to pull people into the conversation in a really approachable way.
Another one of the events that I wanted to keep on everybody's radar will be on Thursday, April 28th at 5 o'clock in the theater, and that will be a screening of the documentary The Hunting Ground. This is a documentary that has been out for a few years now, but I gotta be honest, I remember seeing this last time you did this during Sexual Assault Awareness Week, and this film absolutely changed my entire perspective on this topic. It is extremely poignant to me because, as podcast fans know, I have a daughter in college. She was going to college for the first time just months after I first saw this. I actually used this as a learning tool for her. And of course, I know that that's what you're ultimately intending is to kind of start this conversation. But this film, I left that room from watching it and I was a changed person. And I got to be honest, as somebody who does study film as part of my job and part of my studies, that's the type of film that really changes people's impressions. And I mean, I think that's obviously what you're going for, but the effect it had on me personally was unbelievably valuable. What did you have the chance to talk to some folks who were there last year? What impact did it have on them? How did it change their perspective?
Absolutely. It is an incredibly powerful film, which is one of the reasons why we keep showing it, and it always sparks really good conversations. I think one of the key takeaways that I've heard from students is they don't realize some of these attitudes are still so prevalent. In hearing some of the ways that people react to survivors of sexual assault, students are often like, wait, people still think that way, people still act that way, and being able to kind of unpack that with students about, yes, there are still some really harmful attitudes and misperceptions and beliefs out there, and then talking about how we can challenge them and kind of break down those misconceptions. It's also a really powerful way to talk about resources that are available here and the supports that we offer here for students, and making sure that students know that in terms of the Title IX office, we want to be an open space for students. We do not want to be kind of an intimidating space for students, that we're here to support students if they need any type of help.
And I think we try our very best to discuss these things on the first day of class when we're going through our syllabus. I wonder, though, because students are getting so much information thrown at them that first day, how much they really absorb that. And of course, that's been happening at the college level, going through a syllabus on day one for as long as syllabi have been a thing. You're getting a ton of information thrown at you. How much are you really able to keep in your mind? But this is something that obviously I hope that students maybe understand that they have a place there, but this is really kind of elaborating on that. Like, this is really what we do and what we're here for and how we can help you. And I think that was very valuable too. I also think, and I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about this, but I also think one of the most powerful pieces last year, in addition to the film, was Kayla Murrin, one of our illustrious students here on campus, highly involved, and I'm sure many of you know her, went out of her comfort zone and got up in front of the room and shared an experience that she had. And to put the film into perspective from a person on campus who is highly regarded and respected, talking about things that happened to her, like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And that had to have taken just an unbelievable amount of courage on her end to talk about that so openly, to answer questions from people. And I think, and I hope that people who saw the way that Kayla approached this have not only just a respect for her, but also, look at this whole entire topic a little bit differently, because it did happen to somebody who is also close to so many here on campus. So I was curious, number one, what your perspective was on how Kayla approached that last year and what we can look forward to this year from a student presenter.
Yeah, Kayla's presentation last year was so incredibly powerful, and she did such a wonderful job talking about just a really difficult and painful experience that she's had in her life, and making it relatable. And I think that it really impacted a lot of people. And because of her courage in coming forward and sharing her story, we have another student who has come forward that has asked for the time and space to be able to speak and share their story. So this year, Raven Snyder will be our student speaker and will be kind of opening up with her own story of her experiences of sexual assault and its impact before we go into the hunting ground screening.
Just in a general sense, how do you approach a student? And I don't want to point out a specific student, but just in a general sense, I do think that that's a huge difference that you have a student. But how do you start that topic? How do you start that conversation? Like, how do people, in a general sense, like, self-identify that this was happened and that they want to do this? I guess it would just be difficult to try to figure out how you would approach that initial subject.
Yeah, this is a subject that I would never ask a student.
Right, I guess that's what I'm trying to
speak
say.
about that. First Kayla and then now Raven, they both came forward and said, I have a story that I would like to be able to share. And I'm so happy to be able to provide that time and space for them, but it's not something that I would ever ask a student to do, because that's just a hugely vulnerable and difficult thing.
Yeah, I think that's what I think that you ended up saying it much more eloquently than I did, and because I guess you would almost have to have that student come to you and say, this is something that I'm very passionate about, that I want to share, because frankly, I would imagine most people don't share this, and most people keep it to themselves, and maybe even, I think the film talks about this, is the shame that people feel, and even self-blame, like people blaming themselves for being sexually assaulted, and that's just unbelievably inaccurate. So I do give so much credit to both of these students, and frankly anybody who has the courage to stand before a group, talk about their experiences, and share the knowledge that they have with others. I mean, that just takes a very, very special person to do that. So just real quick, of course, we talked a little bit more about some of the events that are going on week long, but I did want to just remind you that the Fry Bar will be taking place in the ATEC Lounge on Wednesday, April 27th from 11 to 1 p.m. All are welcome. And the Hunting Ground screening will take place on Thursday, April 28th at 5 p.m. in the theater. A couple of other things that we wanted to chat with Megan about here. I don't want to say you, but Central Penn College has been awarded a grant from It's On Us PA in order to develop programming around combating sexual assault. This was a $30,000 grant that was received by 33 different colleges around the state of Pennsylvania. first of all, tell us a bit more about this grant. How did this all come to be? And, when you do finally receive the grant, what are you going to use it for?
Absolutely. We are so excited about this grant. So It's On Us is a national organization that works to combat sexual violence on college campuses. And It's On Us PA is the Pennsylvania chapter of that organization. It's run out of the governor's office, and they make grants available. And so, as you said, this time around, 33 of the colleges that applied were awarded these grants. In order to get the grant, we obviously went through a grant application process, but we had to be able to talk about the ways that we could use that money to further our sexual violence prevention programming and education on campus. So one of the things that we are very excited that we will be able to do with this grant is to implement an online education platform that will talk about sexual violence prevention and consent and bystander intervention and the resources and supports that are available here at the college. So we're excited to be able to start to roll that out in the next few terms, because it will be a resource that will be accessible to all students, that will really provide them with some great information.
Based on where you've been in terms of how you've recognized Sexual Assault Awareness Week, what impact is this grant money going to have on your programming going forward?
This grant's going to have a huge impact in terms of the amount of programming and the kind of size and scope of programming that we'll be able to offer during this week and also throughout the year, bringing in more programs. So whether that's speakers, additional film screenings, it's just really going to open up a lot of opportunities for us.
That's absolutely fantastic. So, Megan, number one, I appreciate everything that you're doing in terms of Sexual Assault Awareness Week, but also the foresight of trying to find grant money like this. There's got to be so many grants out there, so many opportunities, and obviously with you and all of the different hats you wear here, there's only a finite amount of time that you have to seek those types of things out. How difficult is that? I mean, obviously you want to look for grant money, but how difficult is it to find and locate and then figure out which is the most realistic for the school to get, therefore putting your time into it?
Well, for that, I have to give a huge shout out to the advancement team, not only just in terms of finding grants, but helping through the grant process. The advancement team is just incredibly helpful in that effort.
Well, that's awesome, and congratulations are in order for getting that grant.
Well, thank you. Very excited.
One last thing that I wanted to talk about is, Megan, you are the facilitator of What in the World Wednesday. Now, I know that fans of the podcast remember last term when you were on and talked a bit more about that, but I just wanted to notify everybody of some 3 different What in the World Wednesday panels coming up. April 27th, May 11th, and May 25th. And there's also one in June, too. But those are the next 3. They will take place at noon in the Diversity Center. Tell us a little bit more about What in the World Wednesday is. Of course, all are welcome, but who might benefit most from something like this?
Yeah, so What in the World Wednesdays are fun because they're always different. So What in the World Wednesdays, we just have an open conversation, kind of a facilitated dialogue about what's happening in the world. So I come prepared with a number of headlines from across the world of things that are happening that students may or may not be aware of, and we take some time to talk through those and what do these events or happenings mean? What is the impact here to us? Why is it important to talk about these things? And students are also welcome to bring topics that they may have heard of that they want to talk about more. So the topics change every time we have those conversations, and it's a really great opportunity for anybody who either is very interested in world events already or is just kind of curious and wants to learn more. Maybe you don't pay a lot of attention to the news, but you'd like to know more. It's a really fun and open conversation to be able to dive into those topics.
Open, yes. Fun, I believe. I guess the only reason that I wouldn't necessarily think fun, because sometimes some of the topics that you're talking about are extremely heavy. In fact, when I brought one of my classes last term, and one of the key things is this was just after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that's a pretty heavy topic, obviously still relevant at this point, but I do think it's important. One of the things I would just simply say from my own experiences is that, frankly, our students aren't always obviously very engaged in social media, but aren't necessarily as knowledgeable on some current events that could seriously have a major impact on their life. And that's why I really appreciate this, because number one, I think it's accessible for teachers, professors to bring their students here. I think that you can find value. I think you can tie it to almost anything here on campus, almost any major that we offer here on campus. I think that that can be a huge benefit. But I also loved how not only did you come up with a lot of different headlines, the one thing I noticed as a journalist, you used a lot of really good sources, but different sources. How do you approach when you're trying to develop, okay, here's what I want to talk about today. There's hundreds and hundreds of stories. How do you determine, number one, what stories, and number two, where you're pulling that information from?
Yeah, so when it comes to approaching which stories to kind of bring as discussion topics, I really try to look all around the world. So I don't want all of the stories to be happening kind of in one place, because there are things happening all over the world that may or may not be getting as much airtime, even if you do follow the news closely.
And internationally, often, even in our own country, even the war right now in Ukraine, you don't really hear all that much about it. Like, you hear an update here and there. I mean, this is huge in the world, and I guess American media doesn't do as good of a job covering international news as I believe that they should.
Yes, I completely agree. So my kind of first criteria is, do we have stories that encompass the whole world? And then I look for sources. I want to make sure that it's a reputable source, a source that I can trust. But also I try to make sure that it's varied sources. So not all of the sources have the same maybe political slant to them, that we're looking at a wide variety of sources, sources that are not just within the U.S., looking at international sources as well, to make sure that there's a really broad representation there as well.
Now let me ask, April 27th, in addition to all of the 50 other things that you have going on for Sexual Assault Awareness Week, so we have one coming up. Any stories you're looking at?
That's a good question, because a lot can happen in the world between now and April 27th.
100%. There's no question about that.
So I will say I don't necessarily have any topics picked quite yet, but I've got a couple stories I'm keeping my eye on, keeping a pulse on.
Certainly, if you're asking me, I mean, obviously I believe that there is some discussion that's needed about what is going on in Russia and Ukraine right now.
Absolutely.
And also speaking to the propaganda that's happening in Russia about the military excursion, I do think is unbelievably noteworthy. But to your point, I guess we have to wait and see what happens between now and then. As we record this, it's still a few days away. So you never know what could happen between now and then. Megan, first of all, thank you so much for everything that you do. It is absolutely my pleasure to have you on the show and talk about these things, because, frankly, you are one of the MVPs of this campus, not only just because of your work with Sexual Assault Awareness Week, but all of these other wonderful things that you're doing to promote an inclusive space here on campus and promote, frankly, a feeling of safety from our students.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
It's always my pleasure. Well, Megan, thank you very much for joining us on the Nightly News Podcast. I'm sure we'll have you again back in a very near term, but best of luck in Sexual Assault Awareness Week and with What in the World Wednesday this week.
Thank you so much for having me. I always love coming on the podcast.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much to the Dean of Equity and Student Success, Megan Peterson, for being our guest on today's podcast. This is Professor Miller, and we'll see you again next time on the Nightly News Podcast.